Before the silence was broken, before a phone screen lit up a dark hotel room in England, before a nation that had never had a reason to dream of tennis learned to weep with pride, there was a girl in Manila carrying a suitcase that weighed far more than its contents. That girl's name was Alex Eala. She was 12 years old and she was leaving behind the only language that had ever soothed her, the only streets that had ever felt safe, the only childhood comfort she had ever known. She was boarding a plane to a place she had only seen on a screen, Manacor, Spain, home of the Rafa Nadal Academy. She was chasing something that most people in the Philippines, her neighbors, her teachers, even her own extended family, had never once dreamed of chasing. Not football, not basketball, not boxing, tennis. In 2018, a 13-year-old Alex stepped onto those hallowed Mallorcan courts with a forehand that whispered future greatness and a backhand that quietly promised war. She had grown up watching a sport where the champions looked nothing like her. There were no Filipino role models in professional tennis. Not one. No one to call in the middle of the night and ask, "How did you do it? How did you survive the silence?" She existed in a vacuum of her own making, brilliant, isolated, and entirely self-motivated. The academy didn't care about geography. It cared about what happened between the lines. And from the very first week, the coaches at Manacor understood they had stumbled upon something rare. Not just a talented junior with fast feet and clean timing. A competitor with an uncanny emotional control, a stillness under pressure that reminded them of someone very specific. Someone who had bled on those same courts. Someone whose name was carved into the very walls they walked past every morning. That someone was Rafael Nadal. The victories came quickly, each one a small earthquake back home. At 14, she won the Australian Open Junior Doubles title, then Roland Garros Junior Doubles. The Philippines, a country that had never produced a Grand Slam champion in any tennis discipline, began to hold its collective breath. Then came the US Open Junior Singles crown in 2022, first Filipina ever. She was 17 years old and she had already done what generations of players from her nation had not even come close to accomplishing. Rafael Nadal watched from a careful distance. He was still competing then, still battling his body, still fighting the cruel mathematics of a career winding toward its end. But he noticed. His staff noticed. Joan Bosch, her coach, noticed most of all. This young woman was not simply talented. She was wired for pressure in a way that coaching could not teach. And yet, the professional tour is a different beast entirely. Between 2023 and 2024, Alex Eala entered qualifying rounds at Roland Garros, Wimbledon, and the US Open. Each time she fell in the very first match of the qualifying bracket, not the main draw, not the second round, the very first hurdle before the real tournament had even begun, 3 consecutive Grand Slam qualifying exits. While her contemporary Mara Andreeva, the same player Alex had dismantled 6-4, 6-0 in the 2022 US Open Junior quarterfinals, soared past her, Alex watched from outside the glass. Ranked 140th in the world, nothing but promise and a growing pile of pain. Those defeats didn't just sting, they accumulated, they stacked. They began to whisper the most dangerous question an athlete can hear inside their own mind. What if I'm not good enough? What if I was never meant to be here? What nobody knew, what even the closest observers of her career didn't fully grasp, was that the hardest night was still coming. And when it arrived, it would not arrive with a roar. It would arrive with silence, darkness, and a phone screen lighting up at midnight. But before we get there, you need to understand the woman who made that call possible. The woman who stood beside the greatest clay court champion alive for 19 years and said almost nothing. The woman whose silence, when it finally broke, shook the tennis world more than any match result ever could. Her name is Mery Perelló. The world calls her Mery. The tennis world barely knows her name at all, and that is entirely intentional. She met Rafael Nadal at 17 through his sister in their hometown of Manacor, the same sun-baked Mallorcan town where the academy now stands. She watched him claim his first French Open. She watched him conquer Wimbledon. She watched him sob at the Australian Open. She watched him lose, come back, lose again, and return as if defeat were merely a detour on a longer road. For 19 years, she stood beside the greatest competitor the sport has ever produced. And she said almost nothing publicly about any of it. While other tennis partners became celebrities, launching brands, granting interviews, building social media empires, Mery went the opposite direction. She pursued a business management degree at the University of the Balearic Islands. She completed graduate studies at ESADE in Barcelona. She ran the charitable arm of the Rafa Nadal Foundation. She raised her first son, Rafael Jr., born in October 2022, largely out of the public eye. And in August 2025, she welcomed her second son, Miguel, named for her late father who had passed away in April 2023. The world only found out days after the birth. This is a woman who guards privacy like a fortress, who understands that silence is not weakness but a form of power, who watched her husband absorb the pressure of being the best in the world for 2 decades and learned, deeply and personally, what it costs a human being to carry that weight alone. So when Mery Perelló spoke publicly about Alex Eala, even in the indirect, careful manner that she did, the tennis community stopped cold. Because Mery does not speak about players. She does not involve herself in tennis narratives. She does not comment on her husband's proteges or former students or the young athletes who trained within their walls. Not unless something moved her so profoundly that silence became impossible. In a rare candid moment during a foundation event in Mallorca, captured by a Spanish journalist and shared across social media within hours, Mery was asked about the Academy's most celebrated graduate, about Alex Eala's spectacular 2025 season, about what it meant to the Academy family. She paused, not the pause of someone calculating a diplomatic answer, the pause of someone deciding whether to share something real. Rafa cares about her in a way that goes beyond tennis, she said. When she struggles, he feels it. After her worst loss, he could not sleep. He called her. I was there. I heard the conversation. The room went quiet. Nobody had known about that call, not Alex's team, not the Philippine media, not the fans who had followed every match, every ranking update, every historic first. A midnight call from Rafael Nadal, after her biggest loss. So what was that loss, and why did it break even him? To understand why that midnight call shattered every wall Alex Eala had carefully constructed around her emotions, you have to understand what the 2025 Eastbourne Open final represented. By the time Alex arrived at Eastbourne, her season had already rewritten Philippine sporting history. The Miami Open semifinal run, entered as a wildcard ranked 140th in the world, had produced one of the most staggering sequences women's tennis had witnessed in years. She eliminated Jelena Ostapenko. She dismantled Madison Keys, the Australian Open champion, 6-4, 6-2. And then, in a performance that sent shockwaves through the sport, she defeated Iga Swiatek, the former world number 1, 6-2, 7-5, breaking her serve 8 times across 2 sets. Tony Nadal, Rafa's uncle and longtime coach, the architect of his competitive philosophy, had traveled to Miami specifically to observe. When Alex walked off that court, she was no longer a promising junior product. She was a force, but forces unchecked can overextend. And by the time the grass court season arrived, Alex carried something heavier than confidence. She carried expectation. A nation's expectation, a sport's curiosity. The weight of being described in every article, every broadcast segment, every social media caption as the future of women's tennis. The Eastbourne final against a seasoned top 10 opponent became a masterclass in how expectation can suffocate even the most composed competitors. Alex lost the opening set tightly, then the second, then the match. The runner-up finish, which objectively represented a historic achievement for any Filipino player, felt in the locker room afterward like something far worse than a loss. It felt like a door slamming shut on a season-defining moment that might never return. She had been 2 sets away from her first WTA title on European grass, 2 sets away from proving that Miami wasn't a miracle, it was a blueprint. Witnesses at the venue described her composure during the post-match handshake as remarkable. She smiled. She congratulated her opponent. She answered media questions with the measured clarity of someone twice her age. But those who knew her truly knew her, recognized the particular stillness that descends on a competitor who has gone somewhere very quiet inside themselves. She returned to her hotel room. The Philippine journalists sent congratulatory messages. Her coach analyzed the tactical errors. The Academy shared a supportive post. The ranking points still pushed her toward the top 50. None of it touched the weight she was carrying. At some hour past midnight in Eastbourne, England, her phone screen lit up. A Spanish number. A name she had first encountered as a wide-eyed teenager chasing someone through a Madrid airport begging for a photograph. It was Rafa, not a message, not a voice note, a call. And according to Mery, who was beside him, he had been awake for hours, watching replays of the match, unable to settle, unable to look away from the screen, until he simply picked up the phone and dialed. Mery Perelló did not reveal every word spoken during that call. She is not that kind of person, and that conversation was never meant for public consumption. But what she shared, in fragments, carefully, like someone handling ancient glass, painted a picture that the tennis world spent weeks trying to fully absorb. She said that everyone else was telling Alex the same thing: you did great, runner-up is amazing, you should be proud. Rafa said something different. What Rafa said, according to Mery's account, wasn't comfort, it wasn't consolation, it was recognition. He told Alex that the pain she was feeling wasn't weakness, it was proof that she wanted it badly enough to hurt. Proof that she wasn't someone who had accidentally stumbled into a WTA final and felt satisfied with the participation ribbon. He told her that, and this is the fragment that spread across tennis social media like wildfire once Mery mentioned it, the night after his first French Open loss he could not eat. He sat in his hotel room and stared at the wall for 3 hours. And that pain, he said, built the foundation for everything that came after. Every title, every comeback, every time the world counted him out and he returned anyway. Mery, sitting beside him during the call, admitted she began to cry, not out of sadness, out of recognition, because she had witnessed that version of Rafa, the one who sat with pain instead of running from it, the one who turned devastation into architecture. I realized, she said, that he was giving her the one thing that had made him who he is. He was giving her himself. The Philippine media erupted when fragments of the story circulated. Fan accounts dedicated to Alex posted the quote in 37 different languages within one news cycle. Within 48 hours, #Rafa and Alex was trending in the Philippines, Spain, and unexpectedly Japan. Commentators who had spent years covering women's tennis debated whether this constituted inappropriate mentorship or one of the most beautiful sporting moments of the calendar year. But amid the noise, one detail remained consistently striking. Alex, when asked about the night at Eastbourne during a subsequent press conference, paused with that same familiar composure. Then she said, "Someone reminded me why I play. I don't think I'll ever forget that." She never said his name. She didn't have to, because by then everyone understood she was talking about Rafael Nadal. The academy in Manaker hadn't just given Alex Eala better footwork, sharper timing, or a pathway into the professional tour. It gave her something far rarer, something no ranking system or coaching manual can measure: perspective. The lived philosophy of a champion who had stood at the same edge of doubt, pressure, and expectation and chosen, every single time, to step forward anyway. And suddenly, the question around Alex changed. It was no longer if she could win at the highest level. It became, how far can she go carrying that mindset? The answer came almost immediately. 3 months after Eastbourne, the stage shifted to the US Open. New York, Flushing Meadows, under the lights. Alex walked onto the court and did something no Filipino man or woman had ever done in the Open era. She won a Grand Slam main draw singles match. History written in one night, but it wasn't just the result, it was asterisk how she did it. The same identity she had revealed in Miami showed up again, clear, fearless, unmistakable, aggressive from the first ball. Taking time away from her opponent, standing on the baseline like she belonged there, her left-handed topspin opened angles her opponent couldn't read. And then came the shot, the flat forehand down the line, the exact shot Rafael Nadal had spoken to her about during training in Manaker. The one he had broken down, adjusted, refined in a session she would later call unforgettable. This time it wasn't just technique, it was instinct, it was trust, it was something deeper. That ball didn't just land inside the line, it landed with purpose, like she wasn't just executing a shot, she was honoring a moment. By the end of 2025, the rankings caught up with what the tennis world was starting to feel. Top 50, not hype, not projection, arrival. Alex Eala closed out her breakthrough season by capturing the Guadalajara Open title, a victory that felt less like a trophy and more like a declaration. And then came the message. A single post that stopped people mid-scroll across the world. "My dreams have come true. Everything that happened this season is a love letter to my family, friends, team, everyone who supported me, and of course to little Alex." That last line carried weight because little Alex wasn't just a phrase. It was the 12-year-old girl in Manila who packed her life into a suitcase and left home chasing something that didn't come with a map or a guarantee. No blueprint, no precedent, no Filipino before her had ever stood where she was now standing. By March 2026, the numbers told part of the story. World number 29, the highest-ranked Filipino player in WTA history, but numbers never capture the full picture. Because behind every milestone, every breakthrough, every first, there was something constant. Manaker, the academy, and the man who built it. Rafael Nadal didn't just watch her rise from a distance. He stepped back onto the court during the offseason specifically to train with her. The footage said everything. Two players rallying on the same clay. One a retired legend who had defined an era, the other a rising force beginning to shape her own. A decade apart in experience, connected by the same surface, the same discipline, the same obsession. Alex later called it special. Said hitting with Rafa was something most young players only dream about. Nadal's own words were simpler. 1 year later, it felt great to be back on a tennis court. On the surface, that's all it was. 2 posts, 2 perspectives, nothing more. No mention of the late-night call, no mention of Eastbourne, no mention of what had been said quietly off camera in Mallorca. But the subtext was impossible to ignore. Because what you were watching wasn't just a coach and a player. It wasn't even just a mentor and a protege. This was something deeper, a connection built on shared understanding. The kind that only exists between people who know exactly what this path demands. The pressure, the isolation, the cost of chasing greatness when there are no guarantees waiting at the end. They both knew it, they had both stood at that edge, and they both chose again and again to step forward anyway. That's the difference, not talent, not opportunity, the willingness to pay the price repeatedly without certainty. That's what separates champions, and long before the world fully understood it, Mery already did, because while the tennis world was still catching up, her silence had already started to break. And then came the part nobody saw coming. Not a headline, not a press release, not a post-match quote buried in a transcript. This was something quieter, more dangerous, more honest. After the foundation event where Mery first referenced the midnight call, a Spanish journalist pressed further. He asked whether she believed Alex Eala truly understood the weight of what had been invested in her. Not just the facilities, not just the coaching structure at Manaker, but the personal investment, the attention, the time, the belief, the call that didn't have to be made. Mery didn't answer immediately. She sat with the question, let it breathe, then she said, I think she is beginning to understand. A pause. When you are young and winning, you think people believe in you because of what you are doing. It takes time to realize they believed before you did anything. Another pause. Rafael Nadal believed in Alex before Miami, before the US Open, before any of it. Then the line that reframed everything that came before it. That's the only belief that matters. Those two sentences didn't behave like quotes. They traveled. They spread beyond interviews and articles and match reports into early morning voice notes sent between Filipino fans half a world apart, into comment sections dissecting every word like hidden code, into newsroom drafts about mentorship, legacy, and what it means when sports stops being transactional. Because underneath all the rankings, all the trophies, all the breakout results and viral highlights, this story was never just about results. It was about recognition before validation, about being seen before being proven, about someone somewhere deciding without evidence, without guarantees, that a young player's future was worth investing in anyway. And that changes everything. Wins can be measured, titles can be counted, rankings can be tracked, but belief, real belief, the kind that arrives before the world agrees, that's not statistics, that's not development. That's the beginning of every champion story long before anyone realizes they're watching one. This story is about what it means to carry someone else's faith through the moments when your own begins to crack. About a retired champion with 2 young sons, 19 years of partnership, 22 Grand Slam titles, and a name etched into the very academy where future players are forged, who could not sleep after watching a 20-year-old from the Philippines lose a final in England. Not because losses are rare in tennis, but because he remembered what that feeling does to a young athlete. The silence afterward, and he refused to let her sit inside it alone. And then there is Mery, a woman who spent 2 decades standing quietly beside greatness, not in the spotlight, not in the headlines, but in the spaces in between where careers are actually sustained. She understood better than anyone what that midnight call cost her husband, the vulnerability it revealed, the instinct it followed, the humanity it exposed, and she chose to tell the world anyway. Because she believed people deserved to know that Rafael Nadal, the warrior, the competitor, the legend, carried a heart large enough to reach across silence and distance for a young player who needed it most. Right now, Alex Eala is ranked world number 29. She is 20 years old and her career is still only beginning to unfold. Somewhere in Manaker, overlooking the Mallorcan coast, a retired champion and his family watch her rise with a kind of understanding the rest of the world is only just beginning to catch up to. Because this story has never really been about one player alone. It is about what gets passed on when greatness is shared, not just through coaching or instruction but through presence, through timing. Through showing up in the exact moment when silence becomes heavier than loss. Was it mentorship, or was it something that quietly reshaped the trajectory of women's tennis without announcing itself? That answer will only become clear with time, but one thing already is. The best chapters of this story have not been written yet. From a Manila airport departure to a midnight call in Spain to a place inside the world's top 30, Alex Eala's journey is still unfolding. And behind it, quietly, unmistakably, stands a reminder. The greatest gift in sport is not technique, not opportunity, not even belief. It is presence in the darkest hour when nobody else thinks to call.